On December 31, 2020, the transition period for the United Kingdom, UK, to withdraw from the European Union, EU, otherwise known as Brexit, officially came to an end. This marked the end of a years-long process that was overseen by two different prime ministers, included several delays and extensions, and left the UK divided. 1. What was Brexit? Brexit was the nickname for British exit from the EU, the economic and policy union of which the UK had been a member since 1973. That changed on June 23, 2016, when the UK voted to leave the EU. The residents decided that the benefits of free trade weren't enough to offset the costs of the free movement of immigration. The vote was 17.4 million in favor of leaving versus 16.1 million who voted to remain. What caused Brexit? In 2015, the Conservative Party called for a referendum. Most of the pro-Brexit voters were older, working-class residents of England's countryside. 23 They were afraid of the free movement of immigrants and refugees, claiming in the process that citizens of poorer countries were taking jobs and benefits. Small businesses were also frustrated by EU fees. Others felt leaving the EU would create jobs. Many felt the UK paid more into the EU than it received. Those who voted to stay in the EU primarily lived in London, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. They liked free trade with the EU and claimed most EU immigrants were young and eager to work. Most felt that leaving the EU would damage the UK's global status. Brexit process. Leaving the EU was a complicated process. Former UK Prime Minister Theresa May, following the vote as well, submitted the Article 50 withdrawal notification to the EU on March 29, 2017. She negotiated a withdrawal agreement with the EU that outlined their new relationship but couldn't get approval from a divided parliament. In July 2019, Boris Johnson succeeded May as the UK's Prime Minister. Johnson's Conservative Party subsequently attained a majority during a royally mandated general election on December 12, 2019. That allowed him to get Parliament's approval of the withdrawal agreement he negotiated with the EU. On January 23, 2020, the Agreement Act received the necessary legislative royal assent, which is when the Queen formally agrees to make the bill into law. 4 The UK formally left the EU on January 31, 2020, but entered a transition process that ended on December 31, 2020. The EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement was agreed to on December 24, 2020, and signed on December 30. Brexit Trade and Cooperation Agreement Summary. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement has three main pillars: trade, cooperation, and governance, which took effect on January 1, 2021. Notably, the agreement does not cover foreign policy and defence. 6. Trade. The UK is no longer part of the customs union and single market with the EU. Instead, it has a trade agreement that allows zero tariffs and zero quotas on goods traded that comply with the appropriate rules of origin. Free movement between the UK and the EU has ended. European nationals already living in the UK must make sure they have documents from the UK government specifically allowing them to remain. 9. Travellers between the EU and the UK must have passports ready to show at the border. Business travellers have additional requirements. If they do business regularly in an EU country, they may need to set up a local subsidiary. Many services, such as telecommunications, broadcasting, and electronic services, may be taxed. 10. The UK must pay a divorce bill of approximately £34 billion by 2064. This is to fulfill any remaining financial commitments made while a member of the EU. Security. While EU law no longer applies to the UK, the latter will cooperate with the EU on law enforcement and criminal justice matters. 12. Governance. The agreement established a joint partnership council to make sure the agreement is properly applied and interpreted. This includes dispute settlement, legal enforcement, and rules for retaliation if needed. How did Brexit impact the UK? The UK has already suffered from Brexit. The economy has slowed, and many businesses have moved their headquarters to the EU. 13 Here are some of the impacts on growth and jobs. There would also be consequences specific to Ireland, London, and Scotland. Growth. Brexit's biggest disadvantage is its damage to the UK's economic growth. Most of this has been due to the uncertainty surrounding the final outcome. Uncertainty over Brexit slowed the UK's growth from 2.4% in 2015 to 1.6% in 2019. 14 The UK government estimated that Brexit would lower the UK's growth by up to 6.7% over 15 years. It assumed the current terms of free trade but restricted immigration. 15. The British pound fell from $1.48 on the day of the referendum to $1.36 the next day. That helps exports but increases the prices of imports. It has not regained its pre-Brexit high. 16. Jobs. Brexit hurts Britain's younger workers. Germany is projected to have a labor shortage of 3 million skilled workers by 2030. 17. Those jobs won't be as readily available to the UK's workers after Brexit. Employers are having a harder time finding applicants. One reason is that EU-born workers left the UK, their numbers falling by 95% in 2017. This has hit the low-skilled and medium-skilled occupations the most. UK-EU trade lags behind China and the US. After the unveiling of the EU-UK Free Trade Agreement in December 2020, exports and imports to the EU sank by 45.5% and 32.5%, respectively, in January 2021. Textiles, food, and the automotive sector in particular suffered. Data suggested that confusion over new bureaucratic measures and levies impacted trade flows as well as European lockdowns and stockpiling in late 2020. Meanwhile, UK exports to non-EU countries increased by 4.6% during the same period. Imports into the UK from non-EU countries are also on the rise. In January 2021, the value of imports from non-EU countries exceeded that of EU countries for the first time. This trend continued throughout the year, culminating in a record high of $23.2 billion in non-EU imports in November 2021. However, in comparison to pre-pandemic levels, the overall value of UK exports fell by 0.7% from £27.2 billion in February 2020 to £27 billion in November 2021. This comes at a time when global trade elsewhere is booming post-COVID-19. Dutch bank ING expects merchandise world trade volumes to have increased by 10.6% in 2021 compared with the previous year, exceeding pre-pandemic levels by 4.3%. UK FDI fell by 17% in 2020-21. Foreign direct investment, FDI, in the UK peaked in 2016-17 when 2,265 projects were recorded. In the aftermath of the EU referendum, an immediate effect was not felt as companies took time to measure just how Brexit would impact their investment plans. Inflation hits 13-year high. According to figures from the ONS, the UK Consumer Prices Index including owner-occupiers' housing costs, CPIH, rose by 4.8% in the 12 months to December 2021, up from 4.6% in the 12 months to November. This is the highest 12-month inflation rate since September 2008 and was driven by an increase in housing and transport costs. The rising global price of energy, supply chain problems, and higher shipping costs have impacted countries worldwide. In the UK, this has been further exacerbated due to Brexit. According to the academic think tank UK in a Changing Europe, since the 2016 referendum, sterling has continued to fluctuate about 10% below its value pre-vote. The weaker pound has left UK households poorer by increasing the cost of imports, resulting in higher inflation and lower real wage growth. The International Economic Review estimates that Brexit has increased consumer prices by 2.9%, and in turn cost the average household £870 per year. Trade deals with third-party countries will have little impact. When the Brexit transition period ended, the UK lost access to the EU trade deals it had previously profited from. These agreements are estimated to have covered £117 billion of UK exports annually. Since its exit, the UK has signed continuity agreements with more than 60 nations worldwide and established new deals with countries including Australia and New Zealand. The UK government has also stated that a free trade deal with the US remains a top priority, although the Biden administration appears to have put such plans on the back burner.